guruhu choditaha prokshanayaha dushtam etad akarmakam. Translation: Vikukshi offered the remnants of the flesh to King Ikshvaku, who gave it to Vashishta for purification. But Vashishta could immediately understand that part of the flesh had already been taken by Vikukshi, and therefore he said that it was unfit to be used in the Shraddha ceremony. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srila Prabhupada. That which is meant to be offered in yajna cannot be tasted by anyone before being offered to the deities. In our temples, this regulation is in effect. One cannot eat food from the kitchen unless it is offered to the deity. If something is taken before being offered to the deity, the entire preparation is polluted and can no longer be offered. Those engaged in deity worship must know this very well so that they may be saved from committing offenses in deity worship. So this is a purport on which an entire class can be given. There are so many exalted pujaris who are listening in, including those who are dressing the deities right now, Radha Muralidhar, Gaurachandra Mahaprabhu, and Varaha Narasimhadev on the altar at the Bhakti Center. And as Gaur Kumar Prabhu said in his last class here about a week ago on Sri Gadadhar Pandit, he said something which really stuck in my heart and in my mind. He talked about how bhakti is a matter, it's hard work and heart work. So it's not just working hard, but working from the heart. And, obviously it applies very much to deity worship, but I am not qualified to speak on these exalted topics. And at some future date, I'm sure a pujari will speak on this topic. But today is actually an auspicious day for various reasons. So the first one, it's the appearance of Sri Janava Mata, Janava Devi, the consort of Lord Nityananda. She's actually one of my favorite persons to take shelter of and pray to on a regular basis. She's mentioned in Gaudiya Vaishnava scriptures in different places, though not extensively. But thankfully, we know about her through the writings of some of the previous acharyas. And Janava Devi, we are told through Gora Ganodesha Deepika, is Ananga Manjari in the spiritual world, in Goloka Vrindavan. So Ananga Manjari, as everyone probably knows, is the younger sister of Srimati Radharani. And she has some very unique, specific services in the spiritual world. Just this morning, Shri Radhika and I were listening to a wonderful class by His Holiness Indradyumna Swami on Janava Devi. It's on YouTube. And he told some really nectarian characteristics of Ananga Manjari, who is the eternal Roop or Swaroop of Janava Devi in the spiritual world. And one of her services really struck my heart. One of Ananga Manjari's services in the spiritual world is to greet every living entity who has perfected their life in the material world, thrown off the shackles of the material world, and is appearing in Goloka Vrindavan in Gopi Bhav. And she, Ananga Manjari, receives that person and shows them to their quarters, to their residence, and engages them in service of the divine couple Sri Sri Radha Muralidhar. So that's a very lovable, wonderful service that Ananga Manjari does. And when we read about Janava Devi in Gaur Leela, we see that she was an initiating guru to hundreds and thousands of people. Many, many people took shelter of her. And at the time that she was on the planet, after the disappearance of Nityananda Prabhu and Gauranga Mahaprabhu from the vision of people in this world, she was the leading acharya. And everyone in the land who called themselves a Vaishnav including some of our topmost acharyas like Srila Jiva Goswami and Lokanath Goswami. They took shelter of Janava Devi and regarded her as the acharya. Janava Devi also was the guest of honor at the first Gaur Purnima festival that was performed or staged by Narottam Das Thakur in Kheturi. That was the first ever celebration of Gaur Purnima. She was the guest of honor. And you know what she did as a guest of honor? She spent the entire time of the festival, before, during, and after, cooking for the thousands and thousands of people who had come, along with a team of devotees who were serving with her. She cooked for every single person. She fed them. And then after every single person who was there, including her assistants in the kitchen, after every single person had eaten, then she sat down to honor the prasad. That's how she came as the chief guest of honor at the first Gaur Purnima festival. There are many nice classes on Janava Devi on YouTube. Like I said, we heard Indradumna Swami's lecture this morning. I've heard lectures by Radhanath Swami before and other great souls. So if you're interested, please check those out. It's a wonderful day to pray to her and to pray for knowledge, bhakti, and admittance to Gaur Leela, so that we can serve, be absorbed in the pastimes of Gaur Nitai, Lord Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya, and serve them and serve their divine mission, which Srila Prabhupada brought to the West, and get absorbed in that and perfect our lives in this lifetime. The other day that is special today, the other anniversary, is the disappearance of Madhu Pandit. He was a disciple of Gadadhar Pandit, one of the Panchatattva, and he served Gopinath in Vrindavan. Again, this could be an entire class or a seminar, but the personality that I want to talk about today is Sita Devi, the consort of Lord Ramachandra. So we can take darshan of Sitaram, Lakshman, Hanuman. These deities are from the Tobacco Temple in New Jersey, ISKCON of New Jersey, Tobacco. This is the picture from Gaur Purnima of this year. See how kind and beautiful and merciful is Sita Devi, and indeed her beloved Lord Ram. And so with that, I would like to start the rest of the class. Yeah. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvisheshunivadi Paschati Deshtarane Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yatkripatamaham Vande Shri Guru Deenataranam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Shri Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I'm very honored to be here with you all today to discuss Krishna Katha. My sincere obeisances to all of you, especially to the senior Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis who are here, Adi Purush Prabhu, Arjuna Prabhu, and others. I pray for all of your blessings so that I can speak words that are scripturally accurate, pleasing to our beloved Sri Sri Gaurachandra Mahaprabhu, Radha Murlidhar, and Vara Nrsimhadev, and words that evoke deep feelings of devotion to them in our hearts. Sita Devi's glorious qualities have been sung through millions of years. Sita and Ram eternally reside in Ayodhya in the spiritual world, just as Radha Murlidhar eternally reside in Goloka Vrindavan, and they also appear in their deity form for us to worship them and serve them. When the Lord and his consort appear in this world, they display pastimes that are suitable for the role that they are playing. They are brought together by their Leela or pastime Shakti. And when they meet in that particular pastime or in that particular Leela, it appears as if they have just met. But of course, they are eternally together in the spiritual world. And then in the Leela that they display when they appear in the material world for our upliftment, then there are pastimes of separation also, because Krishna is Rasaraj. He wants to experience all kinds of feelings and emotions and mellows. And one of the feelings, in fact, the feeling that intensifies love to the maximum, is when there is physical separation. And so we see in Krishna Lila also, Radha and Krishna, they separate and then they experience love in separation, which is so intense for both of them that it's only very, very select personalities who can understand it, and who can describe it to us. But this separation is Leela and pastime for their pleasure also. Similarly, Ram and Sita in Ramayana, you can see that they also experienced pastimes together as well as pastimes of separation. In one sense, Ramayana can be viewed as the story of Sita. She is central to that great epic. Yes, of course, Ramayana, the name, the descriptions and pastimes are given of Lord Ram. But the Lord is never alone. He's always worshipped and he always appears with his associates and his eternal consort and his other associates. So, different scriptures give different accounts of the appearance and activities of Sita Devi. Valmiki Ramayana, the Ramayana that was written by the sage Valmiki, is the authoritative version of Ramayana. Shukadev Goswami narrates the pastimes of Lord Ram very briefly in Srimad Bhagavatam, 9th canto. In fact, down the road, in a few weeks' time, we will start reading those pastimes. Just two chapters in Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 10 and chapter 11 of the 9th canto, that is just 55 and 36 verses respectively. Only 91 verses in the Srimad Bhagavatam describe the pastimes of Lord Ram and Sita Devi. Now we know Srimad Bhagavatam in total consists of 18,000 verses. So the descriptions of Lord Ram's pastimes in the Bhagavatam, if you take the percentage, I'm a finance person, so I always think in terms of numbers, it's approximately one half of 1% of the total verses in Srimad Bhagavatam. So, this most important and beloved incarnation of the Supreme Lord, Krishna, Lord Ram, is described in only 91 verses in the Bhagavatam. The Ramayana, composed by the great sage Valmiki Muni, is the original narration of Lord Ram's life and pastimes. That great epic contains 24,000 verses. So, why then did Shukadev Goswami use only 91 verses to describe Lord Ram's pastimes? So, Lord Ram appeared in Treta Yuga over 2 million years ago. His life has been told and extolled repeatedly over that entire time frame. Maharaj Parikshit, to whom Shukadev Goswami was narrating Srimad Bhagavatam, had heard Ramayana repeatedly during his entire life, growing up and then in adulthood, because it was the custom in Vedic times, and even until recently in India, it was the custom for people to discuss Ramayana and Mahabharata every evening before going to bed. So Maharaj Parikshit had heard Ramayana repeatedly. And by the time Shukadev Goswami came to the 9th canto, it was perhaps day 6. And we all know that Maharaj Parikshit had been cursed, that at the end of day 7, the snake bird was going to come and bite him. And so he was going to die as per that curse that he had received. So Shukadev Goswami wanted to get to describing Lord Krishna's pastimes which at that time had happened just recently. And then he wanted to describe Uddhav Gita and other important sections in cantos 11 and 12. That is why he described Lord Ram's pastimes so briefly in Srimad Bhagavatam, because Maharaj Parikshit had already heard them and because he wanted to describe Lord Krishna's pastimes in some detail. Srila Prabhupada referred to Valmiki Ramayana several times in the course of his lectures, purports, letters, and morning walks. He called it the authorized, authoritative version and narration of Lord Ram's life. In fact, in a letter dated July 26, 1975, Srila Prabhupada wrote to Dinanath Mishra from Laguna Beach, California, I have a great desire to translate Ramayana from Valmiki Ramayana, because that is authorized. So Valmiki Ramayana describes that Sita was found by King Janak as he was plowing the field in preparation for an important fire sacrifice to be done there. Now, King Janak was the king of Mithila. That kingdom was also called Videha. And as the king, normally he would not be plowing the field, but for important yagyas, fire sacrifices, important ceremonies, worshipping the Supreme Lord, the king would personally undertake that seva, because kings of that era and even other eras who were God conscious, they saw themselves as first and foremost the servants of Krishna, and that the citizens who were under their care, these kings, they thought themselves the custodians of their spiritual life. So they did everything for their material life to clear the obstacles for the citizens to focus on their spiritual life. So King Janak was plowing the field personally in preparation for this fire sacrifice. And there are furrows that happen in a field when a plow is going by. So, there's mounds of soil and then there is a little depression. So, in that furrow, King Janak saw this beautiful little baby girl lying there in the furrow. In Hindi, a furrow is called Sita. So, she was named Sita. And Janak Maharaj and his wife, Sunaina, they took in this beautiful daughter and they started raising her as their own. Sita has many other names. Some of the prominent names are Janaki. She is the daughter of Janak Maharaj, so she is Janaki. She is the princess of the kingdom of Mithila, so she's Maithili. She is also the daughter of Videha, another name for Janak Maharaj. Videha means, Deha means body, and V is someone who has either a special body or one who has transcended his body, which described Janak Maharaj very nicely because he's one of the 12 Mahajans described in Srimad Bhagavatam by Yamaraj. So the 12 Mahajans, Janak Maharaj is one of the 12 Mahajans, and one of his names is Videha. His kingdom is also called Videha. So one of the names for Sita is Vaidehi, which is a version of Videha, the daughter of Videha. And because she appeared from Bhumi or earth, she's also called Bhumi Ja, the offspring of Bhumi. So this wonderful girl, Sita, started growing up in this kingdom of Mithila. Now, it's interesting. This is Valmiki Ramayana that I was describing from. Mahabharata describes that Sita was the actual daughter of Janaka and Sunaina. And that's fine, because what happens, the Lord appears in various yugas, various kalpas, and he appears as Lord Ram, and Sita Devi appears with him. And the broad pastimes and the principles stay the same, but the details can vary from appearance to appearance. So we see that in other places also in the Shastra, where Varahadev might appear in a certain way in one appearance and in a different way in another appearance. And we also see from different Shastras how Nrsimhadev appears in different kalpas and yugas, and there are slight variations to the story, to the details of the story. So as Sita grew up, for her, Janak Maharaj started thinking about her marriage. And he wanted to stage what is known as a Swayamvara. So the concept of Swayamvara is that the bride selects the groom, or her father decides some conditions that only someone who is able to meet those conditions, in other words, someone who is qualified, can be eligible for marriage with his daughter. So Janak knew that Sita is not an ordinary girl. So he set a rather extraordinary condition for any prospective groom to fulfill, before which he could be considered as a potential suitor for his daughter. So Janak had been entrusted the care of Pinaka, which is a bow of Lord Shiva. This Pinaka, now Lord Shiva, we all know his greatness. He's exceptional. So a bow belonging to Lord Shiva is not one of these tiny puny bows that you see around. It's described that this bow was so heavy that 500 people put together could not even push it while the bow was placed on a cart. So normally when something has wheels on it, it's easier to move it, or move it from one place to the other. 500 people together could not push it on a cart. With great difficulty, this bow was brought and hoisted onto the stage for the Swayamvar ceremony. And many princes and kings came from all over the world, because everyone had heard of the extraordinary beauty of Sita Devi. And she was so qualified and the daughter of Janak. So they wanted to have a go at trying to win her hand. Janak announced that whoever could lift this bow and string it would win her hand. Most of the men who were there, they tried and they failed to even move it. Some could not even approach it because of the spiritual energy emanating from that bow. Because remember, this is a bow of Lord Shiva, the most extraordinary personality. So some of them could not even approach it. Some of them approached it and touched it but couldn't lift it. Some could not move it. Forget picking it up, and definitely forget stringing it, because the bow is like this and you have to lift it and then string it from top to bottom. You see, Janak had seen how when Sita was only 5 years old, she had gone into the room where this huge heavy bow was kept, and she was playing there in that room. And there are different descriptions I've heard. Again, details, like I mentioned before, sometimes the details vary between narrations or between different appearances. So in one narration, she was playing with a ball, and that ball had gone under where the bow was. And Janak was watching from a distance. And Sita, this little 5-year-old girl, she just went and effortlessly picked up that huge, gigantic bow with her little finger. When Janak saw this, he realized this daughter of mine is not an ordinary personality. So he had set this condition. So Lord Ram was there along with Lakshman, his younger brother, and their guru Vishwamitra Muni. And Vishwamitra had brought Ram and Lakshman to Janak's kingdom for this Swayamvar. And Vishwamitra Muni, after all these princes had failed, he nodded to Lord Ram, and Ram got up. He not only lifted the bow effortlessly, he bent it to string it from end to end. So great was Ram's strength that he cracked the bow in the middle. There was a loud, tumultuous sound that came from that cracking. It was so loud that everyone who was there, except for 4 people, fell to the ground unconscious. Janak, Ram himself, Vishwamitra Muni, and Lakshman were the only 4 people who stayed standing and fully conscious, while everyone else fell to the ground unconscious from the sound that the cracking of this bow made. and Sita was somewhere else. And then when this feat had been accomplished, then Sita came and garlanded Lord Ram, and they got married. So Ram and Sita went and lived for some years happily in Ayodhya for about 11 years. And we all know, like, Ramayana is an epic. I mentioned it's 24,000 verses. It's even longer than the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's not possible for me to condense the Ramayana into 30 or 40-minute description. So I'm going to take some broad liberties and skip past some major events that happen along the way. And with your permission, I will assume that all the wonderful listeners and devotees who are here know the details of Ramayana. So we all know that the conspiracy happened. Kaikeyi, the youngest wife of Dasharath Maharaj, the father of Lord Ram, her ears were poisoned by her maidservant Manthara, and she went and asked Dasharath for the two boons that he had promised her years and years ago when he was lying wounded and half dead on a battlefield. And Kaikeyi had gone gallantly on a chariot into the middle of that battlefield, rescued him, picked him up, put him on his chariot, and taken him out of danger's way. And Dasharath had promised her two boons, and she had said, well, no, I won't take the boons right now, but I'll keep them for a later date. I'll take a rain check on them. And then later, Kaikeyi, when her ears were poisoned by Manthara, she asked for those two boons. And the two boons were that she wanted Dasharath to fulfill were that Lord Ram, who was about to be installed the prince regent and was going to inherit the kingdom in future, that he be banished to the forest for 14 years. And the second boon was that her own son Bharat, the younger brother of Lord Ram, be made the prince regent instead. And we know the pathos of this situation. And Lord Ram, very gracefully, because Ram appeared on this earth to display the pastimes of a human being who is completely perfect. So Ram gracefully, to keep the word of his father Dashrath, he accepted this banishment, and he went to the forest. And we all know how Sita Devi would not let Ram go alone to the forest. She wanted to go with him, and she managed to make sure that Ramachandra would take Sita with him as he went to the forest. So together they went, and they started living in the forest. And Ramayana is full of beautiful descriptions of their time spent in the forest. So they were in a place called Chitrakoot, where they lived for some time. And Bharat, who at that time, at the time of the boons, had actually been, away from the kingdom. He had gone to visit his in-laws in another part of the world. When he came back, he was horrified at what his mother had done, and he came to Chitrakoot to try and take Lord Ram back and install him as the prince regent. But Lord Ram, after all these entreaties, he said, I cannot do that. And in fact, there's a beautiful description, a very heartrending description of how sincerely Bharat begged Lord Ram to come. And then Lord Ram lovingly refused. And then at one point, Bharat emotionally, um, that's not the word used in Valmiki Ramayana, but it's my construction on it. Emotionally blackmailed Ram, and then Ram said, "Okay, fine, I accept the kingdom, and I give it back to you for the next 14 years for you to rule." So, in one sense, he put it back on Bharat. So Lord Ram continued staying in the forest with Sita and Lakshman, who also refused to stay back in Ayodhya, and they all were in the forest. But Lord Ram sensed that his presence in Chitrakoot might be causing disturbance to the sages, because this huge army had come from Ayodhya and trampled the forest and frightened all the animals and birds living there. And plus, now that it was known where he lived, he sensed that perhaps other citizens of Ayodhya might try and visit, because Ram was beloved of every single person who knew him. So then he decided to leave from Chitrakoot, and Ram and Sita and Lakshman then went to the Dandaka forest, Dandakaranya. On the way, they stayed overnight at Atri Muni and Anasuya Devi's cottage. They were an old couple. Anasuya gave very good instructions to Sita about the duties of a good wife. Along the way, they had many adventures, and I'm going to skip past some of those because I looked at the time and it's 7:48. So I want to finish in 10 minutes and leave time for questions. Um, as they went forward into the forest, into the Dandakaranya, Sita Devi began to speak to Lord Ram. She was speaking gently and softly because that was her nature. She said, material nature is very powerful. Even great souls can fall prey to bad habits and bad activities. It is vital to guard against these bad activities. She mentioned three bad habits in particular: false speech, sexual relations with the wife of another person or the spouse of another person, and violence to living entities who do not approach one with inimical intent. That is, they don't approach us to harm us. So Sita told Ram, you follow the first two very nicely. You are not a single falsehood has ever escaped your lips, and you've taken a vow that you will only have one wife. In those days, Kshatriyas could have many wives. Lord Ram's father, Dashrath, had three wives. And it was allowed because those men, they were capable of taking care of multiple wives nicely and not differentiating between them and treating them all fairly. But Ram had taken the vow that I will only have one wife. So Sita said, you are very truthful, and you never look at any other woman with any other intent in your heart other than that she's your mother. But the third one, you carry your sword and your bow and arrows with you everywhere, and you hunt these animals who are in the forest. Now, you see, to avoid confusion, it's essential to discuss that Ram appeared in the human race of Kshatriyas. Kshatriyas are warriors who are tasked with the job of protecting the kingdom and the citizens. And remember what I said at the beginning of the discussion, that these kings, they view their entire life's purpose to clear the obstacles from the lives of their citizens so that they can have a peaceful material life, not for the sake of material enjoyment, but for the sake of spiritual development and emancipation. So that was the role of a Kshatriya. Now, obviously, this being the material world, from time to time, the kingdom would be attacked by different enemies. And so the Kshatriya had to be always trained, fit, and alert in order to be able to defend the kingdom and defend the citizens, which meant that in battle, they had to go and kill. So, how do you train to go into battle and kill? So, by Shastra, Kshatriyas were allowed to hunt animals so that they could stay fit, they could, develop their fighting prowess, and also be able to um, um, develop their strength in a way that they could be fit to defend the kingdom. And it's not like today's hunting where someone takes a high powered rifle and from half a mile away shoots, with a telescope, shoots a poor animal. These Kshatriyas, they would practice, they would fight barehanded with tigers or with a sword. And so there was a considerable risk involved, and they genuinely had to develop their muscle strength and cunning in order to be able to develop these fighting prowesses. So Sita referred to this And she said, that third point, you do commit violence to these living entities who are not approaching you with an inimical intent. So why do you do that? She said, she uttered some significant words. She said, simply by carrying this bow and the arrows with you, it is increasing your propensity to commit violence. You see, in spiritual life, we are always warned about avoiding bad association and associating only with those who are following on the path of bhakti. So, this pastime teaches us that it's not just people's association, but the association of things and places that influences us. So, Sita told a story of a pure hearted and austere sage who became so pure and powerful that the king of the heavenly planets, Indra, started becoming anxious. He started feeling threatened, and he started wondering, like, if he becomes so exalted, this sage, by his austerities and spiritual practices, what if he becomes qualified to occupy the post of Indra? That's my post. And so he started becoming anxious, and he said, I need to do something to disrupt this. Now, this thinking and this incident shows how strong the material energy is, how strong are the attractions of position, fame, and power. Even Indra, who is a great devotee of the Lord, and Vamanadev, who we heard about in previous discussions of the Bhagavatam, is his younger brother. He appears as his younger brother. So Indra is so exalted. He's the king of the demigods in the heavenly planets. Even Indra falls prey to these attractions of fame, position, and power. So he came to the sage having thought of a way to trick him. Trickery and duplicity are not a characteristic of a person in the mode of goodness. What to speak of one who is a devotee? So Indra went to this sage in the guise of a kshatriya or a warrior king. He said, I am passing by this forest, but I have to go somewhere important and I'll be back soon. But you see, I have this extremely invaluable sword with me. Can you please take care of it? You are in the jungle by yourself, practicing your austerities. So no one will think that I've hidden this sword with you. And so no one will come to think of stealing it from you. But they might steal it from me because I'm passing through all these jungles. There are dacoits and robbers. So please keep this sword with you and please keep it close to you. Because if you let it out of your sight, say you've gone for a bath or you're deep in meditation, if it's not with you constantly, then someone might steal into your ashram and steal it. So the sage, he was in a mood of service. He was a wonderful soul. He accepted. And so he would carry the sword with him wherever he went, for a bath, for gathering flowers for his worship, while meditating, doing his activities of self-realization, while sleeping. Due to the constant association of this sword, he gradually became contaminated and he gradually gave up his spiritual practices. In fact, he performed so many sinful activities that instead of progressing onward in his spiritual life, he went to hell afterwards. So Sita Devi concluded this narration to Lord Ram and said, even carrying a weapon constantly can contaminate one's consciousness, even if you're not using it. So please just carry your bow when you have the duty of killing the demons who are harassing the sages, but otherwise leave it behind. It's said that when good advice is given, especially when it is scripturally sound, it should be accepted. Ram saw that Sita's advice was such, and he thanked her for it, and he started practicing it thereafter. So I want to share again my screen for a second, and then we'll conclude after this. So the lessons that we learned from this pastime that Sita Devi discussed with Lord Ram We already discussed that we should accept good advice when it comes. We should not have ego that, oh, this person is, not really my guru, or, not as advanced as I am. No, we should accept it when good advice comes. We should be very careful with what things and what people we associate with. As aspiring practitioners of bhakti, for us, it's extremely important that what we consume, and not just in terms of food, which is obviously very important, but what we consume in terms of what we hear, what we see, and what we speak. Those things are all things that we associate with. And the people that we associate with, that they are people who will increase our bhakti, not diminish it. Danger can come from bad association, not just of people, but things or places. We have deep within us unwanted qualities or anarthas, which bad association brings out. Or bad association can plant new anarthas in us. And my mouse is not moving. Okay. Srila Prabhupada gave the example of bed bugs, which you might conduct a defumigation and you think all of them are gone, but their eggs might be still dormant till something favorable comes along for their growth, and boom, they come back again. So anarthas are like that. Bad association can be the match that lights those anarthas on fire, and they come roaring back into our life. If someone gives us something that is not appropriate for our situation in life, that is, it's an incompatible match, do not accept it. Politely decline. The sage, for example, could have accepted some cloth or grains or deities, but not this sword. And that sword contaminated his consciousness. And the most important point, a fall down often happens very gradually and imperceptibly. It's rarely that we are here and we suddenly fall down here. It's usually one step at a time, very, very gradually, and it's imperceptible to us and even perhaps to those who are around us, until one day we realize we've come a long way. There is a saying, don't start down the slippery slope, because you never know when you're going to reach the bottom and when it's too late to be able to turn back. Of course, in bhakti, we know that it's never too late to turn back. And while we should remember that we, in our current state, are indeed contaminated in our consciousness, it's never a hopeless situation. In fact, the very advent of Sri Sri Gaurnitai, Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, is for the purpose of not just telling us, but showing us how every single person can be redeemed, and we can go back to the spiritual world in this lifetime itself through the process that they brought, which is primarily the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra and the Swarup Shakti of the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, which is Harikatha. So if we simply hear Harikatha, chant Hare Krishna, and always serve the devotees and serve with the devotees, our life, our return back to the spiritual world is guaranteed. And why do I say that? It's on the strength of Srila Prabhupada's assurance. Krishna is always eager to fulfill the words of his pure devotee. And when a pure devotee promises something, Krishna moves heaven and earth to fulfill those words. So our Srila Prabhupada told us, he said, follow this process that I've given you. Do not deviate from it. And above all, do not criticize the Vaishnavas. He was repeating the words of Lord Chaitanya. And he said, I will guarantee that you go back to Godhead. I will take you back to Godhead. So that's our ticket, our assurance, staying rooted to Srila Prabhupada and the devotees who follow Srila Prabhupada, so that we can perfect our lives. And of course, there are other Vaishnavas. Everyone respects Srila Prabhupada as the world Acharya, even those who have gurus outside of ISKCON. And we respect and worship those Vaishnavas because they are exalted souls also. But we have been fortunate to come to this movement in Srila Prabhupada's movement. So we follow the instructions of Srila Prabhupada and his followers. So I'd like to, there's so much you can say about Sita Devi. She's such an inspiring, wonderful personality. On this day, let's pray to Sita Devi for her blessings on us so that we can perfect our lives in this very lifetime. We can pray to her as well as to Janava Devi, Lord Nityananda's consort. And by their blessings and our efforts, we can hope to achieve perfection someday. Hopefully in this life, but if not in this life, it will not be lost. We can achieve it at a future date. So I'd like to stop here and see if there are any questions, comments. I think Angelica had raised her hand.
Yes, I did, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Oh my God, this class is so amazing. I feel like I can just talk for an hour of the reflections, and there are many, and I will just keep it short. And I also have a few questions. It was really incredible. It struck my heart to just hear how association is also objects and places. I think it's really an incredible point, and it also comes back to the subtlety of association too. And I was just reading this morning Chaitanya Charan's Prabhu, like Gita daily wisdom, and he also had this quote saying, "Those who don't hang together hang separately." How we are essentially comrades in a war on illusion, and how we need to stick together. But I was wondering if you could speak more on the point on protection, because coming to the point that Sita made about carrying the weapon and that already like infusing into the consciousness of the other person and polluting it. I was wondering about that in relationship to our modern world. And it's, we live in New York City or wherever we live. And to some extent, we kind of have to carry those weapons with us. And I'm even thinking about the very common one just being a smartphone, and how it's like we can use it well, but oftentimes it's also just very polluting to our consciousness and taking away our valuable focus away from Krishna. And so, yeah, I'm just wondering, where is that fine line or balance between carrying so-called weapons for protection or having faith that like we don't need them, or kind of just having that in between space. And also another question I had was, you mentioned how if something is not favorable to our practice, like how we can reject a gift. And I was wondering, well, how do we reject a gift? Because I thought that we have to like accept everything, but maybe not use it or something like that.
Yeah. If I can answer the second one first and then go back to the first. So, like, for example, it is common in the business world around Christmas time or Thanksgiving for vendors and other people that we deal with to give gifts, right? So typically I'll get a bottle of, wonderful wine or champagne. And how I deal with it is to politely tell them that I really don't drink and I actually don't know anyone who drinks. And people think I have like two horns and maybe five heads or something, because who doesn't drink, right? In this world, that's what people think. And I tell them that, rather than waste it by giving it to me, I will accept the affection and the emotion with which you are giving it to me, but why don't you give it to someone else? So that could be one way of rejecting it. I'm not saying it's the perfect way of rejecting it, but that's how I do it.
Yeah, thank you. That is a good solution. But then would it also be an offense to say give it to someone else?
Well, so what I want to do is, maybe I don't say always give it to someone else, but I don't want them to feel, well, I bought this expensive bottle of wine for you and now you're rejecting it. So, it's very complex, right? Sometimes you want to just say, like, I don't want to necessarily say, well, throw it in the garbage, which I really want to say, but I don't say it often. So then I say, maybe you can give it to someone who does drink, so it's not like I'm contributing to their bad habit. They're already in it. And I just don't want to be contaminated myself by accepting it in a false spirit of, well, how can I hurt their feelings?
Oh, that's beautiful. So I'm hearing that you're essentially accepting the intention,
Yeah.
and recognizing their affection.
Yeah, and we can sometimes it can be family, Angelica, that does this. And what we can do, we can offer a little prayer to Krishna and say, Krishna, they want to offer something to me. I'm trying to be your devotee, and yes, I recognize I'm not really a devotee, but can you please give them the credit and somehow accept the intention at your lotus feet? So in other words, in a very subtle way, you have engaged them in devotional service. It's not quite direct, it's not quite devotional service, but you're passing along the intention to Krishna. So the first point of protection, that's look, it's something that we all struggle with, right? I have my phone. Sri Radhika will tell you that she wishes my phone was not with me all the time. I also have my phone with me on the pretext that I want to clock the number of steps I take every day. It's always in my pocket. But yes, it's something we all have to determine what the boundaries are. And what I've realized, and the process of bhakti that Prabhupada taught us says this, that rejection of something never works because the seeds of desire haven't quite gone from the heart. So instead, replace it with something positive. So to the extent that we have these transcendental weapons with us, right? These transcendental weapons with us, and to the extent that maybe our cell phone, we can use it for putting on lectures. Like sometimes when I'm between meetings and I'm working on something, I might keep a lecture on playing on my phone in the background, so that even if I'm not 100% listening to it intently, the sound vibration is purifying me, and it's purifying the place that I'm in. So that can be one. And the other is to associate with devotees as much as we can, and think of ourselves as beings with little spiritual battery packs inside of us. So you know how battery packs, our phone constantly runs out of juice and we have to keep charging it, right? So therefore, we have to keep recharging our spiritual batteries constantly. And the way to do it is Harikatha, and every single day picking up our beads. Sometimes many of you are exalted souls, and all of you are exalted souls, and perhaps have a wonderful taste for chanting. But I'll confess that I don't always want to pick up the beads. I'm sometimes like thinking, gosh, I just chanted 16 rounds yesterday. Do I have to chant 16 again today? But I do it anyway, because what we are showing Krishna is not just when I feel it's wonderful or juicy, but even when I feel it's not juicy, I'm still going to chant, and Krishna, please accept it and give me the taste, because I'm very fallen, but I'm still trying to do it. And so these are all means by which we get our battery packs charged, and then we can proceed in the world. We can be in this world, but not of this world. Hope that helps.
Yeah, it helps. It helps a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Athena, you had your hand up.
Hare Krishna, Yasoda Dulal Prabhu, Dandavat Pranams. Thank you so much for such a wonderful class. I feel like I learned so much about Sita Devi and the Ramayana, and such wonderful lessons. I guess I want to piggyback off of Angelica's question. I'm curious because I want to fully understand the direct connection or reasoning, but why did the sword, I guess, contaminate the sage? Is it that somehow the sword carried all the bad karma from killings, for example, of people and animals, and somehow karma does get stored in things, and so your association that karma or energy can jump onto you? And then even in that, doesn't that, if that is the case, does that not suggest that all the kshatriyas are contaminated? But from reading, just from Shastra, we know that that's not true, as we know that there are pure devotee kshatriyas. So that's not exactly the case, and they are engaged in warfare. So is it, and I'm just processing and verbally processing it, or is it that, say, when you mentioned not accepting things that are favorable for you, perhaps kshatriyas have a certain karma or qualification that can assume this type of energy and karma of killing? that say other classes of people are that cannot, and somehow therefore they are affected more. I have a few more questions, but could you touch upon, I guess, exactly that? Because if I know Sita Devi say don't carry the sword as to Ram because he might get contaminated, but that would then assume that all Kshatriyas are degraded. Then, but somehow we know that there are pure devotee Kshatriyas.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
There is many, of course, thank you. There are many layers to this question. So the first thing we must remember is that Ram and Sita were playing the roles of perfect human beings in this life. So it's not that Ram gets contaminated, right? See, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 9.11, fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature as the supreme Lord of all that be. So Ram and Sita are acting as human beings, and they do pastimes to teach us lessons. And so, with that said, every object. So I haven't heard an explanation of the precise question that you asked, Athena, but from my reading and understanding and reflection, every object carries an energy with it, right? So that's the reason why. Have you ever been to someone's house where you felt, wow, there is so much purity and peace and presence here, right? Or the opposite, you go to someone's place and you say, my God, they are in the mode of ignorance. Like, I can't wait to get out of this house, right? So even a house, which is an object, right, has energy. So the same thing, a sword or a gun or bow and arrow, they have an energy, and there's a purpose why they are used, right? And so they are used specifically for killing. So when you see something like that and you're 24 hours a day, in fact, Indra made sure that the sage in his service attitude would actually meditate on this sword day and night by telling him, don't let it out of your sight and please take care of it. And he thought, I'm doing such a service to this great Kshatriya. And so he was constantly with it. And gradually, remember our discussion about the fall down is gradual usually. It's not like all of a sudden you're exalted and suddenly you're fallen, right? It's a very imperceptible slope. So over time, he got contaminated. And then the final reflection I'll have on this is that Kshatriyas, there are plenty of polluted Kshatriyas. I mean, you just read the Bhagavatam and, read Krishna Lila and, you'll see all kinds of warriors who are attacking and terrorizing for demoniac purposes. But Kshatriyas, as you rightly said, who are properly following the Varnashram Dharma, they are using the sword and the other weapons for the purpose of protecting the citizens so that they might have a peaceful life, so that they might perfect their life by devoting themselves to spiritual pursuits. So that's really the thing that protects them. We all work in the lay world, or many of us work in the lay world, and that's our battlefield. Not literally, thankfully we don't have to kill anyone as part of our duty. We're not warriors, but we are warriors in another sense. We are battling the energies of the material world, and everyone around us is constantly like, let's enjoy, let's commit all these activities which in bhakti are severely proscribed, that is prohibited. So we all have our battles to fight, and therefore we must be armed with the right weapons, which is Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Ramayana, and our beads and Vaishnav Sangha. So I do want to be cognizant of the time. I don't know if there's any other question, because it's 8:16, and I do have to log into work in a few minutes myself.
Thank you so much, Yasoda Dulal. I really appreciate your class, and also I hope that you include us in your prayers to Mother Janava and Mother Sita. Thank you so much for such a sweet narration of the pastimes and your spiritual presence. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. It's only a reflection of the wonderful spiritual qualities that everyone on this Sangha has. So I'm just reflecting those. I have no actual qualities of my own. So it's by your blessings. Thank you. I'm hoping to advance myself. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Thank you all. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.